Last spring, I sought solitude in the middle of the Olympic National Forest in Washington. I suffer from depression and was going through a real rough bout. One where I no longer knew my purpose in the world or cared that I even existed. I know that sounds dark, and I should have sought professional help, but I'm one of those people who tend to run away from problems, hoping they'll work themselves out. I'm not sure if the goal was to break myself out of my depression or to isolate myself even further. Either way, I found myself driving through the tall, mossy pines into the tangled depths of the whole rainforest for a long solo backpacking excursion. My journey began at the Ho River trailhead and would take me through the thick woods and then a clearing where I would eventually see Mount Olympus in all its glory. After that, well, I hadn't exactly planned where I would go after that. I would just keep walking, I guess. Unlike my other treks, which were thoroughly planned out, I didn't have a set itinerary. It was as if I wanted to get lost. Yes, that's it, I thought to myself as I strapped my green Delta pack around my waist. I want to get lost. Maybe then I would feel something again and my survival instinct would kick in. Or maybe I would cease to exist altogether. I would just walk until I couldn't go any further. I told no one where I was going. Throughout the first few miles of my hike, I felt as if I wasn't truly a part of my surroundings. It was as if I were just an observer as people and wildlife moved about me. The hanging moss draping over the 3 branches like green sleeves, the rushing of the Ho River, all seemed so distant, even though I was immersed in it all. The only feeling I remember having was the cold touch of rain as it sprinkled on my face like frozen tears. Time seemed to melt away, and before long, I found myself at the edge of the forest. Before I emerged into the clearing, a strange fork in the trail caught my eye. Now, a fork in the trail isn't strange in and of itself, but this one didn't belong here. It wasn't on my topography map. It wasn't listed in the national park. It was out of place. Unlike the trail I was on, this one seemed to snake deeper into the forest. I had hiked this part of the trail many times. Never once did I notice a fork. Maybe it's new, I thought. Maybe they didn't update the maps yet. My original plan was to continue straight, as I always did. But something about the other trail beckoned me to wander to unknown territory. At closer look, the trail looked well maintained, so it wasn't likely I would stray off path. I could always turn around. It was at that moment that I felt an emotion rather than emptiness, if you could even call that an emotion. It was excitement. I found myself walking down the new trail, my adventurous spirit back in commission. At first, the trail just seemed like another part of the whole rainforest, but after a couple miles, the forest began to change. I know that seems crazy, but the forest looked brighter. The Sitka spruce and western hemlock gave way to a variety of birch, oak, and a few pine trees in between. A clear stream trickled alongside my path. A stream, like the trail, not on my map. Even though it wasn't yet the season for wildflowers, a carpet of reds, purples, and yellow covered the forest floor in between the trees. I couldn't identify them, but they were beautiful and brought life to the forest. I felt as if I were in a whole other part of the world. I no longer saw any other people. The trail I started on was packed, as usual, but I didn't see anyone else on this trail, which surprised me. After a while, I started to feel almost high. I felt as if my body and mind were apart from each other, that I was floating rather than walking. I also noticed that the lights were dim and bright in waves, as if someone was slowly turning a dimmer switch back and forth from bright to almost completely dark. Light, dark, light, dark, as if in a steady rhythm. At first, I thought it was the clouds. But a cloud doesn't turn the world completely dark. When the forest darkened, the day seemed to turn to night. When it would brighten again, it looked as if it were midday. The strangest part of all this was that I didn't find any of this strange. Nor did I find it strange that when the forest shifted from light to dark, I would feel myself shift places. When it turned dark, I would no longer be in the trail, but along the forest floor, crawling on all fours, underneath the flowers and ferns. When the forest lightened, I would be back on the trail, hiking like I had been. This happened several times, each shift to the dark, bringing me closer and closer to where I was on the trail. A few more shifts from light to dark, and I started to feel a predatory instinct to hunt, to kill. When it shifted back to light, back to the trail, I began to feel uneasy, as if I was being watched, hunted. Yet, for some reason, I still felt that tranquil high, and I didn't feel the need to run. Shift. Darkness again. I was getting closer to the trail. I saw a figure walking down the trail, wearing a blue raincoat and carrying a green pack like my own. They ambled along the trail, seemingly oblivious to my presence. I crept closer, trying not to make a sound. They looked weak, easy prey. They would never see it coming. I became ravenous for their body. I wanted nothing more than to tear them to shreds. I lunged for them, but they turned around, arms outstretched, ready to fight me off, as if they could do anything to stop me. Their brown eyes met my own. Shift. Back to light. I found myself thrown to the ground, the wind knocked out, and a huge gash on my arm. What the hell just happened? I thought. Something attacked me. I didn't get a good look at it, but the eyes looked so familiar, as if I were looking into a mirror. Realization washed over me. Did I attack myself? How is this possible? I slowly lowered my hands and looked around, scanning the bushes for any sign of movement. Nothing. No sound, and nothing in sight. But I couldn't help but feel I was being watched. My eye was gone. All I felt was dread. I gazed around the unfamiliar landscape. This was not Olympic National Forest. I knew that for a fact. This landscape did not belong in Washington whatsoever. The forest darkened once more, and I could feel whatever darkness that was following me start to close in once again. This time, I did not shift places. I'm still being hunted, I thought. I knew I had to get out of there, but I had no idea which way I came from, or if I would wind up back where I started. Was this some other dimension? A vortex? If so, would retracing my steps even work? It didn't matter. I realized if I waited much longer, whatever attacked me would strike again. I had to move. As I sprinted along the path, the forest began to change. In fact, the whole world began to change. The sky darkened to grey, the trees lost their vibrant leaves, and every branch and bush seemed to turn into sharp, reaching fingers, trying to snatch me in their grasp. A gale force wind began to whip through my ears and slash my face. I heard a foul voice calling for me in the air, though I could only make out a few sentences. "They belong to us. Don't let them get away. Why are you running?" And finally, "I thought you wanted to get lost." I almost stopped cold right then and there. I had wanted to get lost. I told myself that. In my head, anyway. Whatever was pursuing me knew my thoughts and was preying on my weakness. As if in response, the wind howled once more and the voice followed. "That's right," it said. "You want to disappear. You want death." The whisper turned into a deep demonic growl as it added, "And we will give it to you." I pushed my legs harder and caught my foot on a tree root, collapsing completely to the ground, eating dirt. I wanted to give up at that point. Just let it take me. There was no use. As I struggled to my knees, I could feel the tangled brush wind its way around my legs and torso, working its way up to my neck, as if to strangle me, to consume me. I almost let it happen. Whether by a sudden will to live or a refusal to die this way, I stood up and charged forward once again, ripping through the branches which cut through my clothes and skin like thorns. Once I broke free, I saw the familiar mossy green trees and overcast sky of the Olympic National Forest of Washington. The voices angrily yelled my name, demanding me to stop, threatening a worse demise if I leave. I did my best to ignore them all. I jumped forward at the end of the fork onto the soggy grass. I whipped around, expecting my pursuers to be right behind me. They weren't. The trail disappeared, as if it had never existed at all. Did I imagine that? I thought. I looked down to examine my clothes. Still intact. The gash in my arm was gone. There were no cuts or scrapes where the branches twisted around me. However, I still felt the stinging pain, as if my wounds were still there. The voices echoed, but this time only in my head. I hoped it was imagination. The voice kept saying, "Next time." Needless to say, I cut my trip short. I decided, at the very least, to take steps to cure my depression. I'm going to therapy. I quit drinking. I'm even working out and eating right. Anything to get me in a better mindset. However, I can't shake this feeling that I'm no longer alone. That something is always watching, always listening for my next moment of weakness. Listening for the next time I desire to disappear.